Russell Gagan here from Russell's Fishing Tech. Wanted to go over with you guys one of my most deadly king setups the past 5 years or so. I call that setup a pump handle setup. Some guys up and down the lakeshore call it a weapon rig. Some guys may even refer to it as an old school lake trout setup. Basically, the design of a pump handle, as I call it, is just a clip. I prefer the OR16 red offshore clip because it has the tooth inside that you can get the braid past that tooth down there and it won't come off, won't slide. And then basically a weight. And so the setup on this pump handle rig is basically a OR16 release, offshore OR16, a chunk of 25 or 30 pound mono in about 12 to 18 inches in length, and then any kind of snap swivel. Doesn't really matter what kind it is. Happens to be a torpedo non-ball bearing snap swivel. The idea behind the snap swivel is you can very easily and quickly change the size of the weight. Okay, there's two different types of weights that I use, or you can use, I should say. I primarily only run 8, 10, and 12 ounce if they're in the round ball style, like an 8 ounce here, a 10 ounce here, and a 12 ounce here. I don't go too much heavier than the 12 ounce because I feel like that's a lot and it becomes very difficult to run those effectively. This setup is designed to cover, very high in the water column, 10, 15 feet down to about 60 feet. I only run these setups from 50 feet out to 150 feet out behind the board. So in other words, anywhere between 50 feet and 150 feet out is how far I let this setup out before I hook on the planer board. And I would do that with either an 8, 10, or 12 ounce round ball, or otherwise the, I think, preferred method for a lot of weekend anglers or guys that really want to know exactly where this is would be torpedo divers, which is a much easier to reel in, easier to use, a better product if you're really going to commit to this pump handle program. Because these come in a 2 ounce model, which is called a snapper. They come in a 4 ounce model, which is called a shark. An 8 ounce model, which is called a muskie. And a 12 ounce model, which is the cuda. And if I was going to rig up for this, I would probably own 4 ounce, 8 ounce, and 12 ounce. Because I feel I can probably use inline sinkers and other things to sort of, replace the snapper setup, the 2 ounce. So I would use the 4 ounce, the 8 ounce, and the 12 ounce, which are the shark, the muskie, and the cuda. What's a big advantage with the torpedo divers, not only the fact that they're water dynamic, hydrodynamic, I think the term is, they cut through the water much better than a round ball and you're going to get a lot more depth. The other main advantage is all of them come with a depth chart inside. Like this one, they all give you an idea of where they get down on the outside. So like a 8 ounce muskie, for example, with 30 pound braid, gets down 77 feet with 200 feet of line out. So 200 is a little more than I like to let out. So if you let this one out 150, I'm going to make an assumption that it's probably down in that 55 foot range. That's quite a bit deeper than the round balls get. I've used round balls a lot over the years because I have a lot of round balls, but I prefer the torpedo divers just for the fact that they're much easier to use and they give you the chart, so if you want to know where you're going to be. A lot of weekend anglers that I first get rigged up with this program, this is what I set them up with. So for example, again, we've got our OR16 setup, a 12 to 18 inch dropper as I call it here, and then a swivel. And a guy might say, well, why would you use that dropper? The reason I use that dropper is so that it's very easy to grab the weight, get a hold of it as it's coming in. As you can imagine, one of the reasons the guys call these weapon rigs in some areas is when this is swinging back and forth and you got a fish on behind there, if you're trying to net the fish real close to the bait with this swinging on there, it can become very dangerous and hard to block from hitting you in the face. So what I like to do is give this whole section of mono here so I can very easily get a hold of this to take it off. I want to go through the basic setup of a pump handle setup. Basically, we're going to use any 30 size Okuma reel. So whether it be a Convector 30 or a Cold Water 303D, either one of those will work great. When we spool up pump handle setups for customers here in the store, we'll put on about 100 yards of mono backer first, and then 300 yards of 50-pound braid. You can use 30, 40, or 50 pound. Any of those will work. I prefer 50 myself. I believe the chart is based on 30 pound. So whatever works for you is fine. With the fish being as big as they are and everything, I like the 50 pound myself. And then any standard board rod will work. But our number one seller here at the store is the Okuma Classic Pro copper rod that comes with the stainless guides. For a couple of reasons, this rod is $44.99 retail, so it's very inexpensive. But I also recommend this rod to customers because a lot of guys with small boats, I let them know that you don't need to own 100 rods. You know, have some extra reels, but have the right rods that you can switch back and forth. So these rods having the stainless guide, you can use these rods for copper, can use these rods for lead core, can use these rods for braided pumps, or even just mono or braided inline sinkers. So these rods work for everything, where if you'd buy something else, you know, just a standard classic pro rod or big leg series or whatever, and it has just a standard Fuji guides, you then would be needing to switch to this type of rod and have these rods specifically for copper or weighted steel or whatever. So this works a perfect rod, matched up with a 30 size Okuma reel, loaded with 50-pound braid. That's my standard setup. Another really important part of this is the leader. So after I rig the entire reel with 50-pound braid, a little bit of mono backer, as I said, I'll have a 17-foot leader. Mono leader, I like to use 25-pound test, so 17 feet from the braid to the lure, to the snap swivel for the lure, which I'm almost always running flashers. When I'm going to set this setup out, I'll let that 17 feet of mono out until the braid comes out of my rod, and then I will hook this OR16 on the braid right at the knot where it connects to the mono. The reason that I do that is if for whatever reason this release ends up getting a little bit worn, or I have a worn OR16, if it happens to slide, it'll slide and hit that knot and it won't go any further. That's why I do not want to put this on the mono itself, because if I put it on the mono itself, it could slide all the way down to the fish and hit the fish in the head. So put this on the braid. Now some guys say, well, can I put it further than 17 feet out? You can, but one of the advantages I feel like to this setup and why I call it a pump handle is when it gets a little bit choppy out, 1, 2, 3 foot waves, this weight will actually pump up and down in the water, and you'll actually see your rod, if you don't have a board on it, kind of pumping like this up and down in the water. That's where it gets the name pump handle from. And I think that what it does is with a flasher and fly behind it, which is what I prefer to run, or a spoon behind it, you'll actually see the spoon or the flasher and fly kind of have this pumping, pulsating sort of action that I think makes it very difficult for salmon and trout to resist. This setup has been my go-to setup on planer boards for the past 5 years in the months of June and early in August. I'm sorry, month of June and early in July, excuse me, until the water warms up. Again, like I said, this setup is really designed to fish the top 60, 70 feet of the water column. Once the fish go deeper than 60, 70 feet, I switch over to 300, 350, 400, 450 coppers, you know, deep coppers that get me down that 75, 80, 90 feet. Main reason is it's very difficult to run a bunch of these weights with a lot of line out and real heavy without getting them tangled. I do not get very many tangles the way I run these now, and I'm going to give you a little bit of explanation. Really important part is what kind of planer board you run with them. Make sure that you're running the big planer boards. I prefer the SST Pro Mag board from Offshore. I helped design this board. It's a fantastic board. We made this board very thick, and we filled it full of foam so that it takes a lot of weight to pull this board under, as I prefer to release my planer boards versus fight them, reeling them in. But the new Dreamweaver Ninja board will work fine. A TX44 will handle this weight. A Ziggy board in a copper size, you know, one of those bigger sizes, will work as well. So there are a bunch of different boards out there that will work, but just use the bigger salmon style boards, not the smaller walleye boards, as you will see those drag back into your spread and can cause issues with your divers and downriggers getting tangled. So the main way that I run these is when I would go out in the morning, let's say I was going to go out tomorrow, let's say we were in June, and I'm not really sure where the fish are, but I have kind of an idea, you know, that they're up in the top 50 feet of the water column. I would probably run either, if I was running the round balls, I would run like an 8 ounce on one, 3 8-ouncers on one side and 3 10-ouncers on the other. If I was running the torpedoes, I may try 3 4-ouncers on one side, 3 8-ouncers on the other. I almost always, when I run pump handles, run 6 of them at a time. You don't have to do that. If you want to run 2 or you want to run 4, that's fine. This is a pattern though, or a setup that I feel like the more the better, because what this allows you to do is it allows you to stack a lot of rods in the strike zone. That's critical, because a guy might say to himself, well, why wouldn't I run lead core or copper instead of this? Well, the real reason is that none of us probably own 6 300 coppers, or 6 200 coppers, or 6 10-color lead cores. And a lot of times what I find happens is when these fish start to set up in certain sections of the water column, we find ourselves running 2 5-colors, 2 10-colors, and 2 300 coppers. Well, if the fish are down about 40 feet, really only the 10 colors are really in the strike zone. Or if the fish are down 70 feet, really only the 300 coppers are really in the strike zone. The other 4 rods aren't. So when I run 6 of these pump handle setups, or if a guy wants to run 4 or whatever, you can make it so that all 4 of your rods are in the strike zone at one time. It's a huge advantage, and it's one of the reasons I feel like in the months of June and July, I've been stacking up kings big time the last couple of years. Again, if I was heading out tomorrow, let's say I wanted to run 3 of the 8-ounce torpedo divers on one side and 3 of the 4-ounce model on the other. What I would likely do is I'd likely spread them out just a little bit to try to zero them in. When I let my 3 8-ouncers out, I might let them out 70, 90, 110. And then when I let out my 3 4-ouncers, I might let them out 80, 100, and 120. Okay? And if all of a sudden I noticed that one setup and depth range really started to go, let's say I got 2 bites on my 8-ounce out 90 and 2 bites on my 8-ounce out 110, I would probably reel in all my 4-ounce and set them with 8-ouncers out in that same range, and then I would probably move my 8-ouncer out 70 in that same range of 90 to 110. So in the end, I would probably end up with 6 8-ouncers out between 90 and 120 foot out or so, I would say. That way I've got 6 baits basically covering the same part of the water column. What's also nice about this setup is because I've got them so close in the water column, if I get a bite on my middle board or my outside board on the side and I bring that to the middle and bring that fish in, I can then let my middle board or inside board out. They now become my outside or middle board with no risk of tangles, and just let this one back out to the inside. Makes it very easy for me to work this. I'm not trying to drop this heavy weight back and back to the outside, which could be a real tangled mess. If you haven't run pump handle setups before, I definitely would suggest you do. I think these are unbelievable ways to catch big kings, especially in the months of June and July when them fish are up in the top 70 foot of the water column. If you have any questions, feel free to call me at 920-395-2079, or otherwise check out all these great products on our website at www.therealshot.com. Good luck fishing.